So this is one of those interesting questions. If we accept the basis of the Bible that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, we know that evolution is totally wrong, then we have this conundrum that God didn't create the sun and the moon until the 4th day, and yet we have light on the 1st day. So where did that light come from? And it's clear when we look at the details of the 4th day that God did make the sun, the moon and the stars on that day. He made 2 great lights, Genesis 1 verse 16 tells us. The greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament to rule over the day and over the night. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. So quite clear that God specifically says that he did this on the 4th day. So, where did that light come from? Well, there are various ideas that try and get round the fact and say, well, God in fact made the sun, moon and stars on the 1st day, but there was thick cloud so that they couldn't be seen. Only the light from the sun was able to penetrate so that they were aware of light and darkness. But if that was the case, why didn't God say it? That instead of telling us he did it on the 4th day, they did it on the 1st day. Doesn't make sense. And in fact, the answer is so very, very simple. And when we go to the New Testament, it gives us the clues. When 1 John 1 verse 5, "And this is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." And 1 Timothy 6 verse 16, talking about God, who only hath immortality, dwelling in the light which no man can approach unto. And the Apostle Paul, recounting his adventures on the way to Damascus, says, "At midday, O king, I saw in the way a light from heaven above the brightness of the sun, shining round about me and them that journeyed with me." So I think we can say quite clearly and categorically that that light must have come from God. That was the only other source, and God is quite capable of, if he can create the heavens and the stars and the sun and the moon, he can also create a light source. And so when in verse 3 of Genesis chapter 1, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, then we have to picture that this light is coming from God. And for the first 3 days, that was the light source upon the earth. Now, there is a wonderful lesson contained in these things, and it's hinted at when Paul writes to the Corinthians in chapter 4 and verse 6 of the 2 Corinthians. "For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness," so referring to Genesis 1 verse 3, "hath shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." So the reason why God waited until the 4th day is that he was teaching a spiritual lesson, that there is a light greater than the sunlight. The sun is a marvellous thing. It sustains creation and sustains life. Without the sun, we would all perish. There would be no photosynthesis, no plant life, no animals being able to live. So that is something very wonderful. But God is telling us that there's something more wonderful than the sunlight, and that's the Word of God, through which we are enlightened through the ways of God. And it is a light that illuminates us. It does sustain life. But the difference between the two lives is the sun sustains mortal life, whereas the Word of God sustains immortal life, and therefore is much greater than the sun. And therefore, by God creating light from himself in the beginning, then it taught this lesson that God's light, spiritual light, the Word of God, is greater even than the sunlight. And it's clear from Genesis chapter 1 verse 4 that there was a division between light and darkness. In other words, the earth was rotating It wasn't a beautiful earth like I've got it illustrated there. It was all covered in water on the first day, but it was rotating. And so there would be one spot on the earth which would be going into night, and then eventually it would emerge out into the day, and then eventually go back into night. So there was light and darkness. And God says he divided the light from the darkness. So again, we have this spiritual lesson. That's what the natural light does, divides light from darkness. But the Word of God is equally powerful in telling us what is right and what is wrong. And that's why we have to read the Bible and understand it, because it will tell us what we should believe and what is in error. And so there's this lovely spiritual lesson based upon the natural occurrence. And the interesting thing is that God chose to begin the description here with the evening first, followed by the morning. And that's exactly what happens in Israel. As the sun goes down, then the new day begins. It begins in the evening. It begins in darkness. Because again, with this rotating earth, it has this lesson that we're in darkness, we're born in darkness. We have to come to the light after we've been through darkness. So the Word of God is our illumination. So God calls the light day, and the darkness he calls evening, and that was the first day. So just very briefly, I've gone about a minute and a half. Why did God wait until the fourth day to create the sun and the moon and the stars? Well, we've seen the lesson that it shows that God is greater than the natural light which he creates. But it says on the fourth day he created lights as opposed to a single light. Now, up to day 4, the only life we got on earth were plants. Plants can exist in any kind of light, even man-made light, artificial light, they will grow. But what was going to be brought into being on the 5th and 6th days were all the insects and the birds and the animals and the fishes and that. And they need lights. And it's interesting to see just how dependent creation is upon the lights. And God says, they are to divide the day from night, and they're for signs. The idea is signposts. And so many animals and birds and insects navigate using sunlight and different things that God has created, but they are signposts to him. Also signposts to man. He can tell the calendar, seasons, days and years, because man was required to have an ordered life. So a simple question and a simple answer, that light came from God.